She had $20 left until Thursday. She gave it all away. That afternoon, the city of Houston was the loudest it had been in 11 years. Flags on every overpass, horns from the Galleria district down to the ship channel, 73,000 people filing into NRG Stadium for a World Cup match that half of Europe had flown across an ocean to see. She wasn't going to the match. She was walking home from the post office, in her scrubs, after a night shift, with an empty wallet and a manila envelope in her hand that she had just mailed. A grant application, deadline 8 o'clock, sealed with tape because she had run out of envelope glue 3 weeks ago and had not replaced it. She stopped for a stranger on a bench. She spent what she had. She didn't wait to be thanked. She walked away. Let's go back. 41 hours earlier. Because what Naomi Carter could not have known, could not have imagined, standing in that afternoon heat outside Discovery Green, was that the man she helped onto that Uber would spend the next 2 years trying to find a way to repay a debt he didn't even know the full size of. And that the decision he made in a Frankfurt office on a Tuesday morning, 8 months later, would determine whether her son ever ran again. She never found out. He never knew her name. That is the story. The night before the World Cup match, Darius Webb did something he had not done in 11 years. He canceled everything. Not rescheduled, not forwarded to his assistant Liesel, who had been managing his calendar since the year his wife died. Canceled. The dinner with the Frankfurt board liaison. The call with the Texas Medical Center contact his attorney had arranged. The tour of the pediatric unit at Houston Methodist that his foundation had been quietly considering for 8 months. He told Liesel the time zone difference had gotten to him. Liesel said nothing. She had worked for him since 2015. She knew the time zone difference had never once gotten to him. She marked everything as postponed and did not ask. Darius was 53 years old. He ran Webb Capital Health Initiative out of a glass building in Frankfurt's West End district. 1.4 billion euros in assets under management. 31 hospital systems across 6 countries in the portfolio. A reputation in European private healthcare finance that people either respected or feared, depending on which side of a funding decision they had been on. He had built it by being the person who said no when everyone else said yes, not out of cruelty. Out of a system. He had a framework. Every proposed investment went through 4 quantitative screens before a human ever discussed it. The framework had a name. He had named it himself, in the 3rd year after Marta died, when he understood that grief without structure produces nothing except more grief. He called it the Clarity Protocol. Marta had hated the name. She would have hated the whole thing if she had lived to see it. Marta Webb had died on a Tuesday in October of 2019. Cardiac arrhythmia post-surgical in a private clinic in Munich. The clinic had adequate equipment. The monitoring system in the recovery suite had flagged an anomaly at 11:47 p.m. The duty nurse had attempted to reach the attending physician. The physician's phone was on Do Not Disturb. 14 minutes passed. 14 minutes. There was an inquiry. The inquiry produced a report. The report identified 4 systemic failures, 2 of which traced back to understaffing, 1 of which traced back to inadequate monitoring equipment in the secondary recovery suite, and 1 of which traced back to what the report called communication protocol gaps. Darius read the report 7 times. He had funded better equipment for 3 hospital systems that year. He had declined to fund a 4th. That 4th system was the Munich clinic. He had declined because the return on investment projection was 4.3% below his threshold. He had not revisited that decision. The framework had given him a clear answer. He had followed the framework. He decided this, standing in the hallway outside the room where Marta's body was still warm, and he had not revisited it since. The decision was, this is what the framework is for. The framework exists so that no single moment of feeling can override a decision that should be made with evidence. If he abandoned the framework now, he abandoned the only thing standing between him and the next 14 minutes. He was 53 years old. He was in Houston because the World Cup only came to a city once in a generation, and because Marta had loved football, and because he had bought the tickets 2 years before she died when they still believed they would see it together. He had not sold the tickets. He had not given them away. He had carried them in a document folder in his carry-on luggage through 4 apartment moves and 37 countries, and not once opened the envelope since 2019. He opened it on the flight from Frankfurt to Houston. 2 tickets, section 114, row F seats 11 and 12. He would use one. Naomi Carter's alarm went off at 5:43 a.m., not 5:45. She had set it for 5:43 because 5:45 felt like a number someone chose when they still had margin. 5:43 was the number of someone who had already counted the minutes. She had a night shift ending at 6 a.m., a post office that opened at 7:30, and a grant application that had to be postmarked by 8 o'clock. The night shift was at Houston Methodist, the post office was on West Alabama, and the grant application had taken her 11 weeks to complete. She turned off the alarm before the second buzz. Marcus was asleep in the next room. He slept on his left side now always. The cardiologist had told him left side was fine, right side put pressure on the heart. He had not complained about it. He had simply started sleeping on his left side. He was 12 years old. The envelope for the grant application was on the kitchen counter. She had sealed it with packing tape because the envelope's own adhesive strip had dried out, and she had not replaced it. The tape was crooked on the right side. She had peeled it off twice and reapplied it. The third time she left it crooked. She had $47 in her checking account until Thursday. Thursday was payday. Today was Sunday. The application was to the Harris County Medical Assistance Foundation. 43 pages. 17 supporting documents. 2 letters of medical necessity, one from Dr. Okafor and one from the surgical coordinator at Texas Children's. A signed release from Marcus, a signed release from Naomi, 3 years of tax returns. A copy of her insurance explanation of benefits going back to the first procedure in 2021, when Marcus was 9, and the diagnosis was still new enough that Naomi had sat in the car outside the hospital for 22 minutes before she could drive. The foundation offered grants up to $35,000 for pediatric cases with documented insurance shortfall. Marcus's third surgery had an estimated out-of-pocket gap of $31,400. She needed it scheduled within 4 months. After 4 months, Dr. Okafor had said, the window for the least invasive approach closed. There was still a second approach. It was longer, it carried more risk. It was not what he recommended. Naomi had written that down in her notebook. Not what he recommends. 4 months. She had not told Marcus about the 4 months. She had told him the surgery was being scheduled, which was technically true. It was being scheduled, contingent on funding. She had told him it would probably be this fall. He had nodded and asked if he would miss the start of the school year. She had told him probably not. She put on her shoes. The left one went on first because the right lace had a weak point 2 inches from the end, and she had learned to manage it by looping it twice instead of once, picked up the envelope, and walked out. It was 5:49 a.m. She got off the night shift at 6:03. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, folded them into her bag, and put on the clothes she had brought: dark jeans, a gray white shirt, sneakers that had been white when she bought them 14 months ago, and were now the color of concrete in the 3rd month of a Houston summer. She got to the post office at 7:26. The postal clerk stamped the envelope without looking at her. Postmarked 7:27 a.m. She walked out holding nothing. For 11 weeks she had been holding that application. In her bag, in her hand, on the kitchen counter at night, when she sat with a glass of water and checked that all 17 documents were still in the right order. Now she was holding nothing, and the weight that was supposed to come off her shoulders didn't. It just moved somewhere lower. She walked toward Discovery Green because it was on the way home, and because it was the only park in that part of downtown where you could walk through and feel, briefly, like the city had left some space for people who weren't going anywhere in particular. She was not going anywhere in particular. The streets around the convention district were already filling with people in national jerseys, green, red, blue, gold. Someone had strung flags between 2 lampposts on Avenida de las Americas. A group of men outside a hotel were taking photographs with a banner she couldn't read from across the street. It was 7:31 in the morning. The match wasn't until 4 p.m. She put her hands in her pockets and kept walking. Darius left the hotel at 9:17 a.m. He had not eaten breakfast. He had stood at the window of the room on the 14th floor for 22 minutes, with a cup of coffee that went cold, looking at the convention district below. Flags moving in the light wind off the bayou, a group of vendors setting up merchandise tables on the sidewalk, a woman in a red jersey pushing a stroller across the crosswalk at a pace that did not belong to the World Cup morning around her. He had decided to walk to Discovery Green. He had not told Liesel. He did not bring his phone. That last part was deliberate. He had been tethered to a screen for 11 years. Today he would not be. He left the phone on the desk next to his passport and the document envelope, and the 2 unused tickets from 2019, and he rode the elevator down to the lobby with nothing in his pockets except his room keycard, his wallet, and the folded match ticket for this afternoon. Section 114, Row F, Seat 11. Seat 12 would be empty. Discovery Green was already crowded. Not the organized crowd of a ticketed event, the loose, celebratory crowd of a city that had been told the world was watching. Someone had a speaker playing at the north end of the park. A group of children were chasing each other around the fountain. A man in a French jersey was arguing, good-naturedly, with a man in a Moroccan jersey about something neither of them would remember by evening. Darius walked the perimeter path. He walked slowly in the deliberate way of someone who does not walk slowly by habit and is making a conscious choice to do it anyway. He looked at things. The fountain, the flags, a food cart selling alotes where the line had already started wrapping around the side. He had been walking for 31 minutes when the man in the blue jacket passed him on the left side. He did not feel it. That was the part that stayed with him afterward. Not the loss but the competence of it. The man had taken the wallet from his front left pocket. Darius kept his wallet in his front left pocket because every pickpocket manual he had ever read said that was the more secure position. He had read 3 of them, years ago, in the paranoid period after he first started traveling with significant amounts of cash. Front left, no rear pockets, keep the hand near. His hand had not been near, he had been looking at the fountain. He reached into his pocket 6 minutes later, outside the coffee cart at the south end of the park, to pay for a water. His hand found nothing. He tried the right pocket. The key card was there, the match ticket was there, folded into a square. Nothing else. He stood still for 4 seconds. Then he went through every pocket systematically. Front left, front right, jacket inner left, jacket inner right, jacket chest. He did it twice. Then he checked the ground around him, which was pointless, and he knew it was pointless before he did it. But he did it anyway because the body needs to exhaust its options before the brain can accept a situation. The wallet was gone. His phone was on the desk in room 1414. He had no cash, no cards, no identification. No way to call Frankfurt. The room keycard was still in his right pocket. That was the full inventory. He went to the park's visitor information booth first. A young woman in a yellow vest told him he needed to contact the Houston Police Department non-emergency line to file a report, and that the nearest district station was on Rusk Street, approximately a 12-minute walk east. She wrote the address on a small map printout and handed it to him. He thanked her and walked. At the Rusk Street station, he explained the situation to the officer at the front desk. British accent, some German construction underneath it when he was tired, which he was. The officer gave him a form. He filled out the form. The officer took the form, looked at it, and told him someone would contact him by phone within 24 to 48 hours. Darius explained that his phone was at the hotel. The officer asked if he could leave a different contact number. He did not have another number memorized. He had not memorized a phone number since 2009. The officer told him to check back in person, or to call from the hotel, and gave him a case number written on a slip of paper. Darius put the slip in his jacket chest pocket. He walked back out into the heat. It was 10:49 a.m. The match was at 4. He had 5 hours and 11 minutes, no cash, no cards, no identification, and a room keycard that he could use to get back into the Marriott. Except that the Marriott was a 17-minute walk from where he was standing, and thus the lobby staff could not access any funds for him without confirming his identity through the reservation system, which required his passport, which was on the desk next to his phone. He had handled crises before. He had handled a €900 million acquisition that fell apart at the term sheet stage because of a due diligence error that was his analyst's fault and not his, and he had managed it without raising his voice. He had handled the Munich inquiry, which was a different kind of crisis, one that did not have a resolution path, only a verdict, and then a life that continued. This was not a crisis. This was an inconvenience. He kept telling himself that as he tried 3 more options. He stopped a man outside the station who was speaking into his phone and asked to borrow it for one international call. The man looked at him, suit jacket, no tie, sweat starting at the collar, and said he was sorry he couldn't and kept walking. He went into a CVS on the corner of Rusk and asked the cashier if he could use the store phone to make a call. The cashier, a teenager with a name tag that said, Brandon, told him the store didn't have a public phone, that this wasn't, and he paused, apparently searching for the right comparison, the 90s. He walked back to Discovery Green and sat down on a concrete bench outside the CVS on the south side of the park. He sat there for 9 minutes. He was not accustomed to sitting in public with nothing to do. He had not done it. Not voluntarily, not without a phone or a document or a purpose. In a period of time he could not accurately estimate because it had never occurred to him to track it. He sat with his hands on his knees, and his jacket starting to absorb the Houston morning, and he looked at the people walking past him. A family with matching Portugal jerseys. 2 women in hijabs taking a photograph in front of the park sign. A food delivery cyclist in orange who had nothing to do with the World Cup and was simply working. A man asleep on the far bench, his shoes off, a plastic bag wedged under his head. Nobody looked at him. This was the part that registered, in a way he did not have a framework for. 11 years of walking through cities where people looked at him, deferred to him, recognized his assistant's advance work in the way a room rearranged itself before he entered. And here he was, a man in a good jacket on a concrete bench, and nobody looked at him. He had been sitting for 9 minutes when the woman in gray scrubs and white sneakers came around the south corner of the park path. She was not walking fast, not slow either, the specific pace of someone who has determined the most efficient speed to cover a distance on foot when they have no particular reason to hurry, and also no particular reason to linger. She was looking ahead, not at her phone. She did not appear to be carrying her phone in her hand. A canvas bag over her left shoulder. She was going to walk past him and keep going. He stood up. He had not planned to stand up. He stood up because he had been sitting for 9 minutes running through his options, and there were no more options to run through, and this was a human being who was present, and he needed assistance, and asking for it was the rational step. "Excuse me," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. Not with wariness, with the flat professional assessment of someone who had learned to read situations quickly. She took in the bench, the jacket, the absence of a bag or phone, and she stood with her weight even across both feet, not leaning forward and not stepping back. "You need help?" she said. Not "can I help you?" Not "are you okay?" she said. You need help the way a person says it when they have already looked at the situation and formed a conclusion and are simply confirming it out loud before proceeding. "My wallet was taken," he said. "Roughly 90 minutes ago. My phone is at the hotel. I have a key card but no identification and no way to make an international call." She nodded once. "Which hotel?" "JW Marriott downtown." She pulled out her phone. She opened the Uber app. She looked at the estimate. He could not see the screen, and then she looked up at him again. "You have someone at the hotel who can verify you when you get there?" "Yes, the reservation is under my name. My passport is in the room." She nodded again and pressed confirm. He watched her do it. He watched her look at the screen once more after confirming. Not hesitation, something else, a brief check, and then she put the phone in her bag. "Car's 4 minutes out," she said. "White Camry." "I want to reimburse you," Darius said. "If you give me your contact information, I can arrange a transfer today." "I have. Don't worry about it." She said it without interrupting him, without sharpness, just a clean redirect. She had already started looking past him toward the street. He understood she was not going to give him her contact information. "I want to repay you," he said again. Not insisting, stating a fact. She turned back. She looked at him directly, not unkindly, but with a quality of patience that was different from the patience of someone being polite. It was the patience of someone who had heard a sentence like this before, and had already decided what it meant and what it didn't. "Find your people," she said. That's enough. He did not know what to do with that. He was still turning it over when the white Camry pulled to the curb. She confirmed the license plate against the app, then stepped back to give him the door. He got in. She did not get in. He lowered the window. "At minimum, your name." She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she shook her head, one small movement, and stepped back from the curb. The door closed. The car pulled out. Darius turned in his seat and watched her through the rear window. She was already walking. Not watching the car leave. Not standing there to feel the outcome of what she had done. She turned at the corner of Lamar and continued up the block, the canvas bag across her left shoulder, and she went out of sight. The driver asked if he needed the air conditioning lower. "No," Darius said. "This is fine." He faced forward. His hands were flat on his thighs. He thought about the moment she had confirmed the Uber. The look at the screen, the brief pause. He had not understood it at the time. He understood it now. She had looked at her balance. Naomi got home at 8:14 a.m. She took off her shoes at the door. The right one first, then the left, The same order she had been doing since Marcus was 4 years old, and she had read somewhere that consistency at thresholds helped young children with transitions. Marcus was 12 now. The habit had stayed with her after the reason for it was gone. She put her bag on the kitchen counter and stood at the sink and drank a full glass of water without stopping. Then she filled the glass again and carried it to the table and sat down. The kitchen was quiet. Marcus was asleep. He slept until 9 on Sundays when she let him, and she always let him on Sundays because Sunday was the one morning of the week where nothing was required of either of them before 9 a.m. And she protected that the way she protected the 2 trips left on her transit card, carefully, and only for things that actually mattered. She had been awake for 26 hours. She did not lie down. She sat at the table with the water glass and her hands flat on the surface, and she did not let herself think about the grant application, because there was nothing to think about it now. It was postmarked, it was in the system. She had done every single thing that could be done, and now there was a period of waiting. And during the period of waiting, the only available action was to continue existing at the same pace she had been existing at before, which was the pace of someone who could not afford to slow down. She was going to give herself until 9 o'clock. Then she was going to make Marcus breakfast and go to bed for 4 hours before her evening shift. At 8:31, she stood up, put the water glass in the sink, and decided to go back out. She did not have a reason. That was the honest version. She did not have a reason that she could have explained to someone else. The application was sent. The errands were done. Marcus was asleep. She should have been sleeping. Instead, she put her shoes back on. Left first this time, the system reversed without her noticing, picked up her bag and went out the door. She walked the way she had come. Down Lamar, back toward the park. The city had gotten louder in the hour she had been home. More jerseys. More noise from the direction of the convention center. A bus went past with something in Portuguese painted on the side that she couldn't read. She passed the post office. Closed on Sundays. The lights off behind the glass, and kept going. She told herself she was walking because the apartment was too quiet and she was too tired to sleep, and sometimes those two things produced a condition where the only available option was movement. She did not tell herself the other thing, which was that she had given away her last $20 and would need to figure out the week before Thursday, and that walking was the one activity that cost nothing and gave her enough forward motion to keep the calculations at bay for a little while longer. She reached Discovery Green at 8:53. He was still on the bench. She almost didn't stop. She registered him at the periphery. Suit jacket, no bag, sitting very still in the posture of someone who had made a decision to wait and was executing the wait with the same discipline they would bring to any other task. She had walked past dozens of people already this morning. She would have walked past him too. Except that she was a nurse. Not a thought, a reflex. The same thing that happened when she was in the grocery store and a child 3 aisles over made a sound that was different from a tantrum, a particular quality of distress that bypassed language and went straight to the part of her brain that had been trained to respond. She did not think that child might be in trouble. She was already moving. This was the same mechanism, different signal. She read him the way she read patience, the set of the shoulders, the absence of a phone, the very controlled quality of the stillness, which was the stillness of someone managing something rather than someone at rest. She stopped. "You need help?" she said. He told her in 3 sentences, efficient, specific, no escalation in his voice, the way people talked when they were very good at staying functional under pressure and had been doing it long enough that it looked like calm. British accent with something underneath it. He was not panicking. He was simply out of options, and he knew it, and he was telling her because she had stopped and she had asked. She had asked. She pulled out her phone and opened the Uber app. The estimate was $14. She looked at it for 1 second, just one, not long enough for him to notice, or so she believed, and then she confirmed. 4 minutes. She put the phone back in her bag and turned to look at him. He was watching her with the focused attention of someone who was simultaneously grateful and deeply uncomfortable with being in the position of needing to be grateful. The particular combination she had seen in patients who had always been the ones who helped and had never learned how to be the one receiving it. She had seen that face before. She knew what it cost people. She also knew it wasn't her job to fix it. "Car's 4 minutes out," she said. "White Camry." He said he wanted to reimburse her. She told him not to worry about it. He said it again. Not pushback. She understood it wasn't pushback. It was the instinct of a man for whom an unresolved debt was a structural problem that needed to be addressed, and she said, "Find your people." That's enough. She watched the white Camry pull to the curb. She confirmed the plate, force of habit. She always confirmed the plate on a rideshare. She had told every female resident she ever worked with to always confirm the plate, and she stepped back. He lowered the window. "At minimum, your name." She looked at him for 2 seconds. The window framing him, the back seat of a car that was about to take him somewhere she had never been and would not be going. The way he was asking not as a transaction, but as the only thing he could offer that still felt like a fair exchange. She shook her head. Not unkindly, not as a statement about him. Simply no. The car pulled out. She stood on the curb for a moment after it turned the corner. Not watching where it went. Just standing. Then she looked down at her phone. The Uber app still open, the charge already processed, $14, the confirmation number already in her email, and she closed the app and put the phone back in her bag. She started walking home. 11 minutes. She counted them because she was tired, and counting things was something to do with the part of her brain that did not know how to be quiet, the part that was always running the math on everything, the balance, the shifts, the days until Thursday, the 4-month window Dr. Okafor had given her. She did not think about the man in the suit. She thought about Marcus, and whether she had enough eggs, and whether 4 hours of sleep before an evening shift was workable, or whether she needed to ask someone to cover the first hour, which she did not want to do because she had already asked twice this month. And there was a particular social ledger, in a nursing unit, that you spent down faster than you built up, and she was already drawing on reserves she didn't have. She got home at 9:04. Marcus was in the kitchen, standing at the stove in his socks, managing the egg pan with the concentration of someone who had recently decided he was old enough to be in charge of Sunday breakfast and was not going to let the evidence suggest otherwise. He heard the door and looked over his shoulder. "There's one left for you," he said. "I used 2. 2 is enough," she said. She put her bag down and sat at the table and watched him manage the pan. He held the handle with both hands. The cardiologist had said that was fine, that the lifting restriction was for sustained weight, not a pan, and his socks were 2 different shades of gray because he still, at 12 years old, did not check before putting them on. She did not say anything about the socks. She looked at him, and she did not say anything about any of it. The socks, the eggs, the careful concentration, the left side of the pan where he always burned things slightly, because the burner ran hot on the left, and he had not yet learned to compensate. And the $14 sat somewhere in the space between them like something neither of them knew about. She would not know, for another 8 months, what those $14 had set in motion. He would not know for the rest of his life her name. There's something that has always stayed with me about that morning. She gave away the last of what she had to a stranger, in a city that was celebrating something she couldn't afford to participate in. And then she went home and made sure her son had enough eggs. She didn't wait to find out if it mattered. She already knew it did. The Harris County Medical Assistance Foundation sent the response on a Wednesday. Naomi was in the break room at Houston Methodist when her phone buzzed, not a call, an email notification. She looked at the preview without opening it fully. The way you look at something, when you already know what it says, and you are giving yourself one more second before you have to know for certain. Dear Ms. Carter, thank you for your submission to the HCMF Pediatric Case Fund. After review, we are unable to process your application at this time due to an incomplete supporting document requirement. She set the phone face down on the table. She picked up her coffee. She drank it. The coffee was from the machine in the corner, the one that produced something that tasted like coffee if you did not think about it too carefully. She had been drinking it for 4 years. She drank it now. Then she turned the phone back over and read the rest. The missing document was a signed attestation from the treating physician confirming current surgical candidacy, specifically, a Form HCMAF 7B, which differed from the standard letter of medical necessity she had included because it required a separate signature block and a different date format. Dr. Okafor's office had submitted the standard letter. The foundation required the specific form. She called Dr. Okafor's office at 3:17 p.m. The receptionist told her Dr. Okafor was at a conference in Baltimore until the following Tuesday. His covering physician could not sign forms for cases she had not personally reviewed. The earliest Dr. Okafor could address documentation requests was the following Wednesday. The grant deadline for resubmission was the following Friday. 2 days. She asked if there was any way to reach Dr. Okafor directly. The receptionist said she could leave a message. Naomi left a message. She left a second message Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, a different staff member called back to say Dr. Okafor had received the messages and would address them when he returned Tuesday. She resubmitted on Wednesday with the completed form HCMAF 7B. The foundation responded 11 days later. This time, the email arrived at 6:49 a.m., before her shift started. She was in the parking structure, engine off, reading it in the driver's seat with the door still closed. Dear Ms. Carter, we regret to inform you that the current funding cycle has closed. Your application has been reviewed and qualifies for consideration in the next cycle. The next application window opens September 15th. September 15th, she sat in the parking structure for 6 minutes, not crying. Not on her phone. Just sitting with her hands in her lap and the engine off and the concrete pillar in front of her with someone's parking space number stenciled on it in orange, 247. She had needed the surgery scheduled within 4 months of Dr. Okafor's assessment. That assessment had been 8 weeks ago. September 15th was 11 weeks away. If she waited for the next cycle, applied on the first day, received a decision in the standard 6 to 8 week window, that was 19 weeks from now. The 4-month window closed in 8 weeks. She got out of the car, she put on her badge, she went upstairs. There is something that does not get talked about enough in conversations about medical debt and healthcare access, and it is this: the forms are not the barrier. The timing of the forms is the barrier. Most grant cycles open and close on calendars that were designed around institutional budget years, not around the urgency of the cases applying. A family applying for pediatric cardiac support is not applying because the timing is convenient. They are applying because the timing is critical. The cycle does not know this. The cycle does not adjust. What Naomi Carter needed was not more money. She had a specific number, $31,400. She knew exactly what it was, and where it needed to go and when it needed to get there. What stood between her and that number was not the absence of funds. The Harris County Medical Assistance Foundation had allocated funds. What stood between her and that number was an 8-week gap between when the surgery needed to happen and when the next application window opened. 8 weeks. She picked up a second job on the third Saturday after the rejection, a private outpatient clinic on the west side of Greenway Plaza, minor procedures, recovery monitoring, 4 to 6 patients a day on weekends. The rate was $23 an hour, which was $4.17 more than her base rate at Houston Methodist. The clinic director had asked if she had experience with post-procedural cardiac monitoring. She said yes, she had 11 years of it. She worked Saturdays and Sundays at the clinic, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights at the hospital. She was off on Fridays, which meant Fridays were for Marcus, school pickup, dinner, the homework he needed help with, the appointments. On the 4 Fridays in August, she also used the time to research alternative funding sources. She found 9. She built a spreadsheet, not a digital one, a paper one, because her laptop had a cracked hinge that made it unreliable for anything that required it to stay open, with the foundation name, the application requirements, the deadline, and the eligibility criteria. She ruled out 4 immediately. 3 required proof of Texas residency for 5 or more years, and she had been in Houston for 3 years and 7 months, and 1 was specifically for cases involving cancer diagnoses. The remaining 5 she applied to over the course of 6 weeks, 1 at a time, in the order of earliest deadline. She wrote each application at the kitchen table after Marcus went to bed, between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., with the window unit running because August in Houston does not concede to midnight. 2 rejected her on eligibility. 1 told her the fund was fully committed for the fiscal year. 1 never responded. The 5th was Web Capital Health Initiative. She found it on page 3 of a Google search for private pediatric cardiac funding, Houston, Texas. The website was professional and sparse, a logo, a brief statement of mission, a list of hospital systems in the portfolio, a contact form. There was no public application portal. The contact form said, "For partnership and funding inquiries, please submit your organization's information below." She was not an organization. She filled out the form anyway. In the field marked organization name she typed Naomi Carter, RN, Individual Patient Advocacy. In the field marked nature of inquiry, she typed 214 words explaining Marcus's diagnosis, the surgical timeline, the insurance gap, the failed grant applications, and the 8-week window that had already narrowed to 6. She submitted it at 12:53 a.m. on a Tuesday in August. She did not expect a response. She sent it the way you send something when you have run out of options that make sense and you are now operating in the territory of options that probably won't work but cost nothing to try. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope, the refusal to stop before you have actually stopped. She went to bed at 1:07 a.m. Her alarm was set for 5:43. Marcus knew. Not the numbers. She had not told him the numbers, but the shape of things, the way children know the shape of things when they live close enough to a situation to read it through the walls. He was 12. He had been 12 for 4 months. He had watched his mother come home from 2 jobs and sit at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen, and he had heard the window unit and he had seen the light under the door. He did not ask her about it directly. He asked in the only way that did not require her to lie. One Thursday evening in late August, he came into the kitchen while she was making dinner and he said, without preamble, "If I don't have the surgery this fall, what happens?" Not a question. He said it the way people say things when they already know the answer is not good, and they have decided they would rather know than not know. She turned the burner down. She turned around. She looked at him. He was standing in the kitchen doorway in his socks, the left one slightly lower than the right, and she made the decision in the space between one breath and the next. Dr. Okafor said there's another way to do it if we need more time, she said. It takes a little longer and it's more complicated. But it works. Is that the one he recommends? A beat. He recommends the fall one, she said. We're working on it. He nodded. He came into the kitchen and got 2 plates from the cabinet without being asked. He set the table. He filled 2 glasses of water. He did not ask again. She told me once, or rather, she would have told me, if this were the kind of story where people sit down and explain what they were thinking, that the hardest part was not the money. The hardest part was the math she was doing in her head every single day. And the fact that she could not share it with anyone, because the only person she wanted to share it with was 12 years old and had a heart condition, and deserved to spend his energy growing, not worrying. She kept the math inside. She kept going. On the 31st of August, a Sunday, her clinic day, her car was towed. She had parked on Westheimer the night before, 2 blocks from the clinic, in a spot that had a 2-hour limit on weekdays only. She had parked there before. She had checked the sign. The sign said Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. What she had not seen, because it was on the back of the signpost and she had approached from the west, was a second sign. No parking Sunday 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Street cleaning. She came out at 2:17 p.m. The car was gone. The impound lot was on Katy Freeway, 9.3 miles from the clinic. The release fee was $216, cash or card only, payable at the lot. She had $63 in her account. She stood on Westheimer for 4 minutes. Then she called an Uber to the impound lot, $12, and she stood at the counter, and she looked at the man behind the plexiglass and she said, "I don't have the full amount today. Can I make a partial payment and get a date to pay the remainder?" The man behind the plexiglass told her the lot did not accept partial payments. The car would accrue a daily storage fee of $37 per day. She called her colleague Renata, who covered nights at Houston Methodist and who she had loaned $40 to in May. She had not said anything about the $40, but she had not forgotten it either. Renata answered on the second ring and said she could do $150 and could Naomi get the rest. She called her aunt in Beaumont. Her aunt answered and talked for 3 minutes before Naomi could get a word in, and then said she could do $65, but it would have to be Monday because she needed to go to the bank. 150 plus 65 was 215. She needed 216. She asked the man behind the plexiglass if the clinic took debit. He said yes. She put $216 on her debit card. Her account balance afterward was negative $102 and some cents, and her bank charged a $35 overdraft fee, which brought it to negative $137. She paid Renata back on Thursday when her paycheck came in. She did not call her aunt back about the $65. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that is not physical. Physical exhaustion responds to sleep, imperfectly, incompletely, but it responds. This other kind does not respond to sleep. It accumulates in the part of you that is responsible for making decisions, and after enough accumulation, it does not produce breakdown. It produces a very flat, very steady quality of forward movement, the way water moves when the gradient is slight but continuous. She kept moving. She did not tell anyone at the hospital about the car. She did not tell anyone about the overdraft. She did not tell Marcus. She took the bus for 6 days, while her account restabilized, and the bus added 31 minutes to her commute each direction, and she used those 31 minutes to review the Web Capital website on her phone and draft in her head what she would say if anyone ever responded to the contact form. Nobody had responded to the contact form. She had submitted it 22 days ago. On the 8th of September at 2:14 p.m., she received an email from an address ending in Web Capital Health. Com. The subject line said, Patient Advocacy Inquiry, Naomi Carter, RN. The body of the email was 4 sentences. It was signed by a woman named Liesl Hoffman, Senior Program Associate, Web Capital Health Initiative. Dear Ms. Carter, your inquiry has been reviewed by our team and forwarded to our Houston Portfolio Director. We are not a direct grant organization, but we have shared your case summary with Houston Methodist's Internal Patient Assistance Coordinator as a referral. You may expect contact from their office within 5 to 7 business days. She read it twice. Then she looked up the Houston Methodist Patient Assistance Coordinator, a name she had walked past on a placard for 3 years without ever needing to stop at the door. Her name was Christine Adeyemi. Naomi's shift started in 47 minutes. She went upstairs. Darius landed in Frankfurt at 6:41 a.m. on the 14th of August. Liesl was at the arrivals gate with a coffee and a single printed page, his schedule for the next 4 days, already reorganized to account for the Houston time loss. She had been his assistant for 9 years. She did not ask about the match. She did not ask about Houston. She handed him the coffee and the schedule and fell into step beside him. And they walked the length of the terminal together in the way of 2 people who have developed over a long time a shared understanding of when to talk and when not to. He did not tell her about the wallet. He had recovered it fully. The Marriott had been efficient. The Frankfurt consulate had processed a temporary travel document in 4 hours. The police case number had produced nothing, and he had expected it to produce nothing. He was whole. He was fine. He was exactly where he had been before Houston, minus one afternoon in NRG Stadium, that he had not, in the end, attended, because by the time the replacement card arrived it was 2 hours to kick off, and he had sat in the room instead and watched the match on the hotel television with the sound low, and that had been, he thought, probably closer to what she would have wanted anyway. Marta had always said stadiums were too loud. He went to the office on the 15th. He was in his usual chair at his usual time, with his usual view of the West End skyline, and the portfolio review was on the desk in front of him, and the first item on the agenda was the quarterly assessment of the North American holdings. Liesl brought in the Houston Methodist file at 10:23 a.m. He had seen the file before. He had seen it 3 times, once when it entered the portfolio for initial assessment, once when it came back for the second screening, and once when it arrived for what should have been a final decision and he had instead marked it deferred, insufficient utilization data, and returned it to the holding queue. That had been 6 months ago. He opened it. He read it the way he read everything. Systematically, from the executive summary forward, not skipping to the numbers first, which was the habit of people who wanted to feel like they had read a document without actually reading it. The executive summary was 3 pages. The clinical outcomes section was 11. The infrastructure gap analysis was 7. And it was the 7 pages he had been using 6 months ago as the basis for his deferral. The utilization numbers in the pediatric cardiac unit had been below the threshold his framework required before he would authorize a major capital commitment. He read the infrastructure gap analysis again. On page 4 there was a table. He had seen this table before. It listed the categories of pediatric cardiac cases handled by the unit in the previous fiscal year, cross-referenced with insurance coverage outcomes. The rightmost column was labeled, out-of-pocket gap per complex case, average. The number in that column was $31,400. He had read this number 6 months ago. He had noted it. He had factored it into the utilization assessment and moved on. He read it again now, $31,400. He set the file down on the desk. He did not pick up his pen. He did not reach for the coffee Liesl had placed to his left at 10:23. He sat with his hands flat on the desk, and he looked at the table on page 4 of the Houston Methodist infrastructure gap analysis, and he thought about a woman standing on a sidewalk in the Houston sun, checking her account balance before confirming a $14 car. Not the same number. He was not constructing a correspondence. He was not building a framework out of coincidence, but the shape of it. the shape of it. He had built the clarity protocol because he had understood, in the months after Munich, that the only way to prevent the next Munich was to remove the variable that had caused it. The variable was not the attending physician's phone. The variable was not the nurse's communication chain, or the monitoring equipment gap, or the secondary recovery suite. Those were the downstream failures. The upstream variable, the one that had produced all of them, was a single funding decision made by a man sitting at a desk in Frankfurt, who had looked at a return on investment projection and found it insufficient. The clarity protocol said, never make that mistake again. Build a framework that makes decisions before a human can get emotional about them. Set the thresholds. Apply them consistently. Do not let any single case, however compelling, however proximate, override a process that exists precisely because proximate cases are the most dangerous. The heart is a liar, the framework is not. He had believed this for 4 years. He sat at his desk on the 15th of August, and he read the number $31,400, and he thought about the clarity protocol. And then he thought about a woman who had walked past a man sitting on a concrete bench, and had stopped because she was a nurse, and she had recognized the shape of someone who was not okay. Not because of a framework, because of what she knew. She had known something he had trained himself out of knowing. He did not pick up the phone to call Liesel. He did not open the scoring template. He did not run the Houston Methodist file through the 4th quantitative screen, which was the step that had been waiting for 6 months. He turned to page 7 of the infrastructure gap analysis. He read the section on the gap coverage fund, the proposed structure, the projected case volume, the mechanism for distributing funds to individual complex cases that fell outside standard insurance coverage. He read it twice. Then he read the clinical outcomes projections for the pediatric cardiac unit if the capital commitment was approved. Then he turned back to page 4. $31,400 per case, average. He knew what that number looked like on the other side of it. He knew what it looked like when a person was sitting on the other side of that number with a child who needed a surgery and a timeline that was not going to wait for the next funding cycle. He knew because he had been the person who set the threshold that the number had failed to clear. He had been that person for 4 years. He picked up his pen. He wrote 4 words in the margin of page 4, next to the table, in the precise and slightly compressed handwriting that Liesel had once said looked like it belonged to someone who charged by the word. Approve, full amount, gap fund. Then he set the pen down and looked at what he had written for 11 seconds. He picked up the phone. Liesel, he said. Houston Methodist. Schedule the approval call for this week, she said. The utilization data still hasn't cleared the 4th screen. He said, I know. She said nothing. In 9 years she had learned precisely when his silences were invitations and when they were not. This one was not. Thursday, she said. 2 p.m. Frankfurt time. Thursday, he said. He hung up. He looked out the window at the West End skyline, the glass and concrete of it, the flatness of the August sky above it. He had looked at this view from this chair for 6 years. He had made 714 funding decisions from this chair. He had a record of each one in a filing system Liesel maintained with the same precision she applied to everything. And in that record there was a column for the date of decision, and a column for the rationale, and a column for the outcome, and in none of those columns was there a field for the thing that had actually moved him this time. There was no field for. A woman checked her account balance before she called a car. There was no field for. She did not wait to be thanked. There was no field for. She said find your people, as if she already knew that finding people was the whole of what anyone could do for anyone else. He left those things in the margin with the 4 words. They would not appear in the record. They did not need to. There was something else he did not put in the record. On the evening of the 15th he opened his laptop at home, not the work laptop, the personal one, the one he used for things that were not work, and he opened the Uber app. He had downloaded it in Houston and not deleted it. He looked at the trip record from the 29th of July. The pickup location was listed as Discovery Green. The drop-off was the JW Marriott downtown. The driver's name was listed. The rider's name was not. Below the trip details was the name of the account that had booked it, Naomi C. He looked at it for a while. Then he closed the app. He did not search for her. He had thought about whether to search for her, and he had decided, with the same deliberateness he applied to everything, that searching for her would turn what she had done into a transaction waiting to be closed. She had specifically declined to make it a transaction. The least he could do was honor that. He owed her a debt he could not repay directly. He understood this kind of debt. He had been carrying a different one for 4 years, and the only useful thing he had ever managed to do with it was to build something that meant the same gap could not swallow someone else. He closed the laptop. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but that was not new. Thursday's call with Houston Methodist lasted 51 minutes. The clinical team presented. The finance director presented. Darius asked 11 questions. Liesl had a record of them, because she transcribed every approval call, and 11 was 2 fewer than his average for a commitment of this size, which she noted in the margins of her transcript in tinsel and did not mention to him. At the 47-minute mark, the Houston Methodist CFO asked whether the gap coverage fund structure needed additional review before the commitment was finalized. Darius said, "No," the CFO said, "the per-case allocation mechanism is somewhat unusual for a private." "I've read the mechanism," Darius said. "It's sound. Move forward." The call ended at the 51-minute mark. Liesl sent the commitment letter that afternoon. There is a version of this story where Darius Webb makes this decision, because it is the right financial decision, because the utilization data eventually cleared, because the framework arrived at the same answer through the proper process. That version is cleaner. It fits the record better. It is the version that appears in the Webb Capital annual report for that year, under the heading Houston Methodist Pediatric Cardiac Unit, Full Capital Commitment, Q3. But the 4 words in the margin of page 4, approve, full amount, gap fund, those were written before the utilization data cleared. They were written on the 15th of August, 11 seconds after Darius Webb set down his pen and looked at what he had done. The framework had not produced them. Something else had. The commitment letter arrived at Houston Methodist on a Thursday morning. Not to Naomi. She was not in the chain of distribution for capital funding communications. She was a nurse on the cardiac floor. The letter went to the CFO's office, then to the clinical leadership team, then to the department heads, and by the time it reached anyone who worked the floor, it had become a different kind of communication. An internal memo, 2 paragraphs informational in tone announcing a major capital commitment from a private European health fund and the establishment of a new patient assistance mechanism within the pediatric cardiac unit. The memo went out on a Friday afternoon. Naomi read it on Saturday morning in the break room, between a 6 a.m. discharge and a 7:30 a.m. admission. She read it twice. She did not know the name Webb Capital Health Initiative. She had submitted a contact form to a website with that name 6 weeks ago and had received a 4-sentence email in return and had not heard anything since. She did not make the connection. Why would she? The memo described a $2.1 million institutional commitment. Her contact form had been 214 words from a private individual asking about a single case. She folded the memo in half and put it in the pocket of her scrubs and went to see her 7:30 admission. She made the connection on a Tuesday. Christine Adeyemi's office was on the 4th floor, administrative wing, 3rd door on the left from the elevator. Naomi had walked past it for 3 years. She had made an appointment for 11 a.m. on the Tuesday after the memo, because the Liesl-Hoffman email had said, "You may expect contact from their office within 5 to 7 business days," and it had now been 9, and she had a format window that was down to 6 weeks. Christine Adeyemi was 47 years old, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a desk that had the organized density of someone who handled too many cases and had developed a precise system for not losing any of them. She looked at Naomi's file for 43 seconds before she looked up. "You submitted an inquiry to Webb Capital," she said. 6 weeks ago, Naomi said, "through their contact form. I received an email saying the case had been referred here." Christine nodded slowly, not with surprise, with the expression of someone fitting a piece into a puzzle they had already been working on. "We received a referral flag attached to the Webb commitment," she said. "Individual case, pediatric cardiac surgical timeline. No name attached. The referral just said the case coordinator would make contact." She looked back down at the file. "Marcus Carter," she said. "H12 surgical window closes 6 weeks," Naomi said. Christine looked at her over the reading glasses. "Sit down," she said. The gap coverage fund was not yet fully operational. The commitment had been finalized 11 days ago and the administrative structure was still being built. But Christine had a discretionary authorization for urgent cases pending full fund activation, and Marcus Carter's file met every criterion for urgent: documented surgical timeline, documented insurance gap, Documented failed alternative funding attempts. The discretionary authorization covered up to $35,000. The gap was $31,400. Christine said, I need 2 forms completed and a countersignature from Dr. Okafor. Can you have those to me by Thursday? Yes, Naomi said. Then we can have a preliminary approval by end of next week. Surgery can be scheduled before the window closes. Naomi sat in the chair across from Christine Adeyemi's desk, and she looked at the woman across from her and she did not say anything for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Then she said, What is Web Capital? Christine looked at her. Private European Health Fund, Frankfurt-based. They've been in our portfolio for about 8 months. We've been in discussions about a capital partnership. The commitment came through faster than we expected, honestly. The partners signed off unusually quickly for a commitment of this size. Do you know who made the decision? Naomi said. The fund director, Christine said. Man named Webb, Darius Webb. She said it the way you say a name when it belongs to a file and not yet to a person. German-British, I think. He was in Houston in July, actually. We had a site visit scheduled and he canceled it. Came back in September for the full review. Naomi looked at her. July, she said. Late July, Christine said. Around the World Cup, I think. Half the city was booked solid. She turned a page in the file. Does that matter? Naomi looked at the desk, at the file. At the name on the tab written in Christine's handwriting. Carter, Marks, Pediatric Cardiac. No, she said. It doesn't matter. She reached into her bag and took out a pen. Tell me which forms. She did not tell Christine about the bench at Discovery Green. She did not tell anyone. What would she have said? That the man who had just committed $2.1 million to the pediatric cardiac unit at her hospital was the same man she had called an Uber for on a Sunday morning in July. That she had spent $14 she didn't have, and he had turned it into a gap coverage fund? It did not work that way. She knew it did not work that way. The math was not that clean, and the world was not that legible, and she had been a nurse long enough to know that causation was one of the most abused concepts in medicine and probably in everything else. He had made a funding decision. She had helped a stranger. These were 2 separate things that had happened in the same city in the same summer. She was fairly certain they were not unrelated. She did not say this out loud. She kept it in the same interior place where she kept the 4-month window and the overdraft fee and the 31 minutes on the bus and the 6 weeks of applications. The place that was not for other people. The place that was just hers. There's something I keep thinking about in this part of the story. She knew. Not the mechanism, not the chain of events, not what had happened in an office in Frankfurt on the 15th of August. But she knew. The way you know things when you have been paying close enough attention to the world for long enough. That what she had done on that Sunday morning had come back around. She knew it and she did not say it and she went back to work. That to me is the most specific kind of dignity. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind that already knows its own value and doesn't need anyone else to confirm it. Liesel sent the internal memo on the same Thursday. The commitment letter went to Houston Methodist. She sent it to Darius at 6:47 a.m. Frankfurt time. Before he arrived at the office, the way she sent everything she considered both administrative and personal, quietly without comment, as an attachment with no subject line flourish, just the document and the date. The memo was a formality. It recorded the commitment, the fund structure, the hospital counterparty, the timeline for activation. 3 pages. He had approved all of it on Thursday's call. There was nothing in the memo he had not already signed. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in the section labeled Fund Designation and Naming, there was a single line Liesel had added without being asked. Per CFO Adeyemi's office, the gap coverage mechanism will be designated internally as the Forward Fund, pending final board ratification of the name. He read the line twice. He had not named it. He had not asked for it to be named. He had approved the structure and the mechanism, and the per-case allocation formula, and he had said nothing about what to call it. Someone at Houston Methodist had named it Forward. He set the memo on the desk. He picked up his coffee. This one was still warm. Liesel had brought it 3 minutes ago. He held the cup in both hands and looked out the window at the West End skyline, and he thought about what it meant to go forward. When everything in you had been built, for 4 years around the proposition that the only safe direction was backward. Backward into the data, backward into the framework, backward into the decision that would never again be made by the part of you that could be wrong. He thought about $14. He thought about the bench. He thought about, find your people. He had not found her. he was not going to find her. He had decided that, and the decision held, because she had made the terms of the transaction clear and honoring them was the only thing left he could do. But someone at Houston Methodist had named the fund forward, and he thought, yes, he thought, that's right. He did not write this down. He did not add it to the record. He set the coffee down and he opened the next file on his desk and he went back to work. Dr. Okafor countersigned the forms on Wednesday. Christine Adeyemi issued the preliminary approval on Friday at 4:17 p.m. Naomi was in the parking structure when the email came through. Not the same parking structure, a different one. She had found a monthly permit, 2 blocks further from the hospital, that was $19 cheaper. And she sat in the car with the engine off and she read the email on her phone. Dear Ms. Carter, we are pleased to confirm preliminary approval of patient assistance funding for Marcus Carter under the Forward Fund, Houston Methodist Pediatric Cardiac. The approved amount is $31,400, covering the documented out-of-pocket gap for the upcoming surgical procedure. Please coordinate with Dr. Okafor's office to schedule the procedure at your earliest convenience. She read it once. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the concrete pillar in front of her. A different parking structure, a different pillar, but the same orange stencil, space number 114. She did not move for 4 minutes. Then she picked up the phone and called Dr. Okafor's office. The receptionist answered on the 3rd ring. This is Naomi Carter, she said. I need to schedule a surgery for my son. Dr. Okafor scheduled the surgery for the 17th of October. He had a slot on the 15th, but Naomi asked for the 17th. The 15th was a Wednesday. Marcus had a reading assessment at school on the 15th that he had been preparing for since August. A standardized test that would determine his placement in the accelerated language program he wanted to be in, and that he had told her once, carefully. The way he told her things he did not want to make into a big deal, that he really wanted to be in. She did not tell Dr. Okafor why she wanted the 17th. She just said the 15th didn't work. He said the 17th was fine. She told Marcus on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks before. She had thought about how to tell him, not the words, the setting. She wanted him to be somewhere he felt steady. She told him in the kitchen, while they were doing dishes after dinner, because the kitchen was where they had most of their real conversations, the ones that were not about logistics or homework or scheduling, and because doing something with your hands made hard information easier to receive. She said, the surgery is scheduled. October 17th. He was drying a bowl. He dried the bowl completely before he said anything. The fall one, he said. The one Dr. Okafor recommends. Yes, he set the bowl on the counter. He picked up a glass. You got the money, he said, not a question. He said it the way he had said everything this summer, already knowing the shape of things, asking only to confirm. There's a fund at the hospital, she said, for cases like yours. It came through. He dried the glass. He set it next to the bowl. Okay, he said. That was it. That was all he said. She handed him the next glass and he dried it, and she washed the pan, and they finished the dishes in the ordinary quiet of two people who had been through something together and did not need to narrate it to each other. I've thought about that moment a lot. The bowl first, then the glass, then, okay, he was 12 years old. He had been carrying the weight of not knowing for 4 months, and when the knowing came, he dried a bowl and said okay and picked up the next glass. Some people learn very young how to hold things. You do not always get to choose what you learn young. The morning of October 17th, Naomi woke up at 4:51 a.m., not from an alarm. She had set the alarm for 5:30, but she was awake at 4:51, her eyes open in the dark, looking at the ceiling of her bedroom. She lay still for 6 minutes. Then she got up, she showered, she made coffee. She made Marcus's breakfast. 2 eggs, toast, the orange juice she had bought specifically for this morning. The kind that came in the carton with the thick pulp that he liked, and that was 63 cents more than the kind she usually bought. She set it on the table with a glass. She went to his room and stood in the doorway. He was already awake, lying on his left side, looking at his phone. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and he did not look like a boy who was about to have surgery. He looked like a boy who had been waiting for a morning to arrive, and it had arrived, and now they were going to go do the thing. Breakfast is ready, she said. Okay, he said. He got up. He ate. He did not eat everything. Half the toast, all the eggs, most of the juice. She did not say anything about the half piece of toast. She drank her coffee and watched him eat, and the kitchen was quiet in the way of early mornings when the sissy has not yet committed to being awake. At 6:17 a.m. she picked up her bag. He picked up his jacket. They walked out together. Houston Methodist was 11 minutes from the apartment on foot. They had driven it 100 times. This morning she had planned to drive, but Marcus said at the door without looking at her, "Can we walk?" She looked at him. "It's not that far," he said. She locked the car. They walked. The morning was the particular kind of Houston October that felt like a concession from the weather. Not cool exactly, but the heat had stepped back a degree or two, enough that the air felt like something you could move through without working at it. The streets were quiet. A delivery truck idled on the corner of Fannin. A woman was walking a dog the size of a small ottoman in the direction of Herman Park. Marcus walked with his hands in his jacket pockets. He did not talk for the first 5 minutes. Then he said, "Do you remember when I was 9, and I thought I wanted to be an astronaut?" "You wanted to be an astronaut for about 3 weeks, she said. "I looked it up," he said. "You need really good cardiovascular health to be an astronaut. They check your heart." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "So I figured," he said, "if the heart's going to get fixed anyway." He said this in the tone he used when he had been thinking about something for a long time and had decided it was safe to say out loud. She recognized the tone. She had heard it all his life, the careful, sideways approach to the things that mattered most to him. "You've got time," she said. "The astronaut thing." He nodded, not convinced considering. They crossed Main Street. The hospital was visible now, the northwest tower rising above the med center tree line. Marcus looked at it the way you look at something you have been thinking about for months and are now seeing in real life, after a long time of it only existing in your head. He did not slow down. She noticed that. She would notice it for years afterward, the fact that he did not slow down. That he kept walking at exactly the same pace he had maintained the whole 11 minutes, hands in his pockets, moving toward the thing that was going to fix him, without hesitating. He was 12 years old. He had learned, somewhere in the months of her not saying things and him not asking, that the way you go toward something difficult is at the same speed you use for everything else. You do not give it the satisfaction of a different pace. She did not know where he had learned this. She had a feeling she did. The pre-op intake took 47 minutes. Naomi sat in the waiting room, not the family waiting room, the pre-op area, where you could see the double doors that led to the surgical corridor. Gray chairs. A television mounted high on the wall with the sound muted, showing a morning news program. A man in the corner with his eyes closed, head back. A woman 2 seats away texting steadily, not looking up. A nurse Naomi recognized from the 3rd floor, Deja. Nights they had overlapped maybe 30 times over 3 years, came out through the double doors and saw her and stopped. "Carter," she said, "is that your son in there?" "Yes," Naomi said. Deja looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Okafor's team is solid. You know that." "I know," Naomi said. Deja nodded. She went back through the double doors. Naomi looked at the television. The news program was showing weather. She could see from the graphic that the forecast for Houston was the same as it had been for 3 days, partly cloudy, high of 81. She sat with her hands in her lap and she waited. She did not look at her phone. She did not bring paperwork. She had not brought anything to read or do because she had understood, when she was packing her bag that morning, that what this hour required was not distraction. What it required was the capacity to simply be present in a gray chair and let the thing that was happening happen without trying to fill the space around it with something else. She sat. She was good at sitting. She had not always been. She had learned at the same place. She learned most of the things she knew about the gap between what you could control and what you couldn't. In the years since Marcus's first diagnosis, in the waiting rooms and the parking structures and the kitchen table at 1 in the morning with the window unit running, you learn to sit the same way you learn anything else that costs you something, slowly, and then all at once. Dr. Okafor came out at 11:43 a.m. He walked toward her with his hands at his sides and his mask pulled down and his face doing the thing that surgeons' faces do when the news is good. It's not a smile exactly, a settlement, a particular quality of ease that you learn to read if you work in a hospital long enough. She stood up, he said. He did well, 2 words, she said. Okay, she sat back down. Dr. Okafor sat in the chair next to her, and he talked for 6 minutes. The procedure, the closure, the recovery timeline, the follow-up schedule, the things to watch for in the first 72 hours. She listened to all of it. She had her nurse's brain on, the part that processed clinical information cleanly and stored it in the right place. And she listened with that brain, and she stored everything he said. When he finished, she said, "When can I see him?" 40 minutes, he said. "He's going to be groggy." "Don't let him talk too much." "He won't," she said. Dr. Okafor nodded. He stood up. He went back through the double doors. Naomi looked at the gray chair across from her, at the television, at the weather graphic, partly cloudy, high of 81. She picked up her phone. She opened her messages. She typed to Marcus, "Surgery went well. You're going to be okay. I'll see you in 40 minutes. She sent it knowing he would not see it for a while, knowing he was still under, knowing the message would be there when he woke up, so that the first thing he saw on his phone was already an answer to the question he would be asking before he was fully conscious. She put the phone back in her bag. She looked at her hands in her lap. Her hands were steady. 41 minutes later, a recovery room nurse came to the waiting area and said, "Mrs. Carter?" Miss Naomi said. She stood up. "Carter." The nurse nodded and turned, and Naomi followed her through the double doors. 2 years later, Marcus Carter ran his first mile without stopping. Not on a track. On the sidewalk outside their apartment building on a Saturday morning in October, the same month, 2 years on as the surgery. He had been cleared for unrestricted cardiovascular activity 6 months after the procedure, and for 6 months after that he had been building up slowly, the way Dr. Okafor had mapped it out. Short distances, measured pace, consistent recovery. He had not complained about the pace. He had kept the log himself in a notebook he kept on his desk, tracking distance and time and heart rate with the same precision his mother used for everything that mattered. The first mile took him 11 minutes and 43 seconds. He knocked on her bedroom door when he got back. She was getting ready for work. Charge nurse orientations started Monday, and she had paperwork to review over the weekend, and she was standing at the dresser in her uniform when he knocked. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. He was breathing harder than normal, but not much harder. His face had the particular quality of someone who has just proven something to themselves that they were not entirely certain they could prove. He held up the notebook. He had circled the time with a pen. She looked at it. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. She looked at him. "Good," she said. He nodded. He pulled the door closed behind him. She turned back to the dresser. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The uniform, the badge, the reading glasses she had started needing 6 months ago, and had finally gotten filled instead of putting it off, the way she had been putting it off for 2 years. She put the glasses on. She went back to the paperwork. The charge nurse position had come through in March. She had applied in January, which was 4 months after Marcus's surgery, which was the first January in 3 years that she had applied for something because she wanted it, rather than because she needed the differential. The distinction mattered to her. She had been specific about it in her own mind. "This is the first time in a long time I am reaching for something because it is the next thing, not because I am falling short of the last thing." The position came with a $9.37 hourly increase and a shift change, days, Monday through Friday, with rotating on-call weekends. She had worked nights for 7 years. The first week on days she kept waking up at 4:51 a.m. out of habit, lying in the dark and waiting for the alarm that no longer went off that early. By the third week, she was sleeping until 6:13. She considered this a significant victory and did not mention it to anyone. Marcus turned 14 in July. He was taller than she had expected. She had been tracking his growth the way you track everything when a child has a cardiac history, watching for the markers, and somewhere between 12 and 14, he had simply grown past the chart and become a person with height rather than a child with measurements. He was 14 and taller than she was, and he still put his socks on, without checking if they matched, and she had stopped saying anything about the socks the way she had stopped saying anything about a lot of things that had resolved themselves without requiring her to intervene. He had not become an astronaut. He had become interested in architecture instead. He had found a summer program at Rice that accepted high school students, and he had applied, and he had been accepted, and he had spent 6 weeks that summer learning how to draw buildings from the inside out, which was, he explained to her one evening, in a way that suggested he had thought about it more than he let on, not that different from learning how to understand a heart. "You start with the structure," he said. "Then you figure out what it needs to hold." She had not said anything to that. She had been washing dishes. She let the water run for a moment longer than necessary. She went back to Discovery Green once. not intentionally. She was walking back from a Saturday errand. Dry cleaners on Lamar, 2 blocks west, and she came through the park the same way she had come through it on the morning, in July 2 years ago. Because it was still the most direct route and because she had never once altered her route to avoid a place where something had happened. She came through the south entrance. She walked the perimeter path. She passed the concrete bench outside the CVS on the south side. She did not stop. She had not expected to stop. There was nothing at the bench, no plaque, no marker, no evidence that anything had occurred there beyond the ordinary business of a park bench in a city that hosted a World Cup and then went back to being itself. A woman was sitting on the bench now, eating a sandwich, reading something on her phone. Naomi walked past. She thought. Somewhere in Frankfurt, or London, or wherever he was now, the man who had sat on that bench 2 years ago was making decisions about hospitals and equipment and the specific gap between what medicine could do and what patients could afford. She did not know this. She had no way of knowing this. It was simply the most likely thing, given what she knew of who he was, and she had been right about enough things in her life to trust her own assessments. She thought. He kept going too. She turned at the corner of Lamar and walked the 11 minutes home. Marcus was in his room when she got back, at his desk, with his architecture notebook open and his socks 2 different shades of gray. She could see him through the open door. The left side of his face, the way he held his pencil, the particular angle of his head when he was thinking about something he had not yet solved. She did not stop in the doorway. She kept walking to the kitchen, put her bag down, filled a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink. Through the wall she could hear the scratch of pencil on paper, the specific sound of someone working on something they had chosen for themselves. She had been listening to that sound all his life. First the uncertain sounds of early childhood. Everything tried and abandoned and tried again, and then gradually the particular sounds that stayed, the ones that came back day after day until they became the texture of who he was. She had learned to tell the difference between the sounds he made when he was going through the motions and the sounds he made when he was actually in it. This was the second kind. She put the glass in the sink. She took off her shoes. Right first, then left, the system reversed from what it had been when he was 4 and she was doing it for him. Some small unconscious adjustment that had happened without her noticing. She picked up her glasses from the counter. She went to the table and sat down and opened her laptop and started on the paperwork. Outside, somewhere, the city was being exactly what it always was, loud and partial and indifferent to most of what happened inside its buildings. The same city where a man had sat on a bench with nothing in his pockets. The same city where she had stood on a sidewalk at 7:27 a.m. with a postmarked envelope and no plan beyond the next hour. She opened the first document. She put her glasses on. She went to work. Darius arrived at Houston Methodist on a Tuesday morning in October. The site visit had been on the calendar for 3 weeks. A formal portfolio review, the kind that happened once a year for major commitments, where the fund director walked the facility and met the clinical leadership and reviewed outcomes data in person, rather than through a screen in Frankfurt. Liesel had arranged everything, the flight, the hotel, the meeting schedule, the car from the airport. He did not cancel this one. He arrived at 9:07 a.m. and met the CFO, Dr. Raymond Ossie, in the main lobby. Dr. Ossie was 61, with the particular ease of a man who had spent decades explaining complex things to people who needed to trust him before they understood him. He shook Darius's hand and said, "Good to finally have you here." Darius said, "Thank you for the time." They walked. The tour took 43 minutes. Dr. Ossie walked him through the cardiac wing first. The equipment, the monitoring stations, the renovation to the secondary recovery suite that the capital commitment had made possible. Darius asked 7 questions. They were the same kind of questions he always asked, specific, structural, aimed at the gap between what a facility had and what it needed rather than at what it had accomplished. He was not a man who was interested in being shown success. He was interested in being shown the distance between where something was and where it was still trying to get. Dr. Ossie understood this quickly. He adjusted his presentation accordingly. They reached the pediatric cardiac unit at 10:11 a.m. It was quieter than the rest of the floor. Not empty, but with the particular quality of quiet that exists in spaces where things are serious and people have learned to move carefully. 3 rooms occupied. A nurse at the station writing in a chart. A child's drawing taped to the wall outside one of the rooms, a house with a large yellow sun, The way children draw suns when they are drawing happiness rather than light. Darius looked at the drawing for a moment. Then he looked at the wall at the end of the corridor. The board was there. He had not known it would be there. It was not on the tour agenda, not something Dr. O.C. had mentioned in any of the pre-visit communications. It was simply a board, the kind that hospitals put in corridors, a corkboard with a printed header and pages pinned beneath it. The header said, Forward Fund Year 1, the patients who made it through. Below the header, a list of 23 names. Not photographs, not case summaries, just names, first and last, in a clean printed font, pinned to the board in a single column. He walked to it. He read each name. He did it slowly, the way he had read the infrastructure analysis, from the top, not skipping, not scanning. 23 names. Each one a case that the gap coverage mechanism had covered. Each one a number that had failed to clear a threshold somewhere, an insurance limit, a funding cycle deadline, a prior authorization that had come back denied. Each one a person. He was on the 14th name when Dr. O.C. said, from a few feet behind him, we named the board after the fund. The team voted on the name. We gave them 3 options and they all picked Forward. Darius did not look away from the board. Why Forward, he said. I asked the same thing, Dr. O.C. said. The charge nurse who proposed it said, because these kids can't look back. The only direction available to them is forward. He finished reading the list, 23 names. The last name on the list was Carter Marcus. He did not know this name. He had no way of knowing this name. The referral Liesel had sent had contained no name, only a case summary, and the case summary had not followed through to the commitment documents. There was no chain of paper connecting the woman on the sidewalk in July to the 14-year-old boy, whose name was now the last entry on a list of 23. He read the name. He moved on. He looked at the board for another moment, at the header, at the list, at the clean simple fact of 23 names on a piece of paper pinned to a wall in a pediatric cardiac corridor. Then he turned back to Dr. O.C. The charge nurse, he said. The one who proposed the name, yes. Is she here today? Dr. O.C. checked his watch. Should be. Tuesday morning she's usually on the floor. He looked toward the nursing station. That's actually her right now. She had her back to them. She was at the station, reviewing something in a chart, and she had the focused quality of someone who is in the middle of a task and is going to finish it before she does anything else. Dark blue scrubs, her badge clipped at the left shoulder. Her hair pulled back, her glasses, reading glasses, the kind with thin frames perched at the end of her nose. Dr. O.C. said, Mrs. Carter, she held up one finger without turning around. She finished the line she was reading. Then she turned. She saw Dr. O.C. first, then the man beside him, tall, suit jacket, no tie, the kind of European cut that looked slightly different from American tailoring in a way you noticed without being able to name. She did not recognize him. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone who came through with administration, with the flat professional assessment she had been using her entire career, reading the situation before committing to a response. Dr. O.C. said, This is Darius Webb, he's the director of the fund. She looked at Darius, he looked at her. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds. And this is the part that neither of them would ever fully describe to another person, because there are things that happen between 2 people in a corridor that belong only to that corridor. In those 3 seconds, something passed. Not recognition. Not quite. He had not seen her face clearly enough on that Sunday morning in July to be certain. She had not seen him at all on any morning since. But the shape of something. The particular quality of stillness she carried. The way she stood with her weight even across both feet, not leaning forward and not stepping back, looking at him directly without performance. He had seen that quality once before, on a sidewalk, in a woman who had looked at his situation, assessed it in 2 seconds and proceeded. He was not certain. He was fairly certain, he said. You proposed the name, yes, she said. Forward, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, not as a question, as a statement he was placing carefully into the space between them to see what it did, because they can only go in one direction. She looked at him. That's right, she said. He nodded once. She looked at him for 2 more seconds. Then she looked at Dr. O.C. and said, I'll be with you in about 10 minutes, if you need the floor numbers. She looked back at her chart. She had already turned back to her work. Dr. O.C. led him down the corridor toward the conference room where the outcomes review was scheduled. They walked past the board. Darius did not look at it again. He did not need to. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 17 minutes. He asked 9 questions. The outcomes data was presented by the clinical coordinator, and the finance team. The Forward Fund had processed 23 cases in its first operational year, with an average per-case disbursement of $29,811. Total disbursed, $687,653. Projected Year 2 case volume, 31. At the end of the meeting, Dr. Osi asked if he had any final comments. Darius said, "Increase the annual allocation by $400,000. I'll have Liesel send the amendment this week." Dr. Osi looked at him. "The utilization rate supports it," Darius said. Dr. Osi said, "I won't argue." He left the building at 12:49 p.m. The car was waiting on the Fannin Street side. He got in. The driver confirmed the destination, the hotel, then the airport. Darius said yes. They pulled out onto Fannin. He looked out the window at the Texas Medical Center complex. The towers, the walkways, the particular density of a place where a very large number of people were working on very difficult problems at the same time. He had been in medical complexes all over the world: Frankfurt, London, Zurich, Cape Town, Singapore. He had walked their corridors and asked his questions and looked at their gap analyses and made his decisions. He had not, until today, stood in a pediatric cardiac corridor and read a list of 23 names on a board and understood, with the specific understanding that bypasses the framework and arrives on its own terms, what the numbers in those files actually were. They were people who had needed something, and someone had stopped. The Clarity Protocol remained. He had not dismantled it. It was still the structure through which every decision passed, the 4 screens, the thresholds, the documentation requirements. It was still the thing that prevented the next 14 minutes. He believed this. He still believed this. But he understood now that a framework without a person behind it, who is still capable of being moved, is not a protection. It is just a system. And systems do not stop on sidewalks. People do. She was still on the floor when he left the building. She did not know he had increased the allocation. She would find out the following Tuesday when Christine Adeyemi sent an email to the clinical leadership team with the subject line, "Forward Fund, Year 2 Allocation Update." She would read it in the break room between patients, the same way she had read everything that mattered this past year. Quickly, in the available minutes, standing up. She would read the number. She would read that the projected case volume for Year 2 was 31. She would fold her phone and put it in her pocket. She would go back to her patients. The board stayed on the wall. The names on it changed each year, new names added, the list growing as the fund grew, as the allocation increased, as the mechanism that had been built from a 4-word margin note in a Frankfurt office on a Tuesday in August began to do what it had been built to do. Approve, full amount, gap fund. The name did not change. Forward. It stayed forward. Because a charge nurse on the pediatric cardiac floor of Houston Methodist had stood in a meeting and said, "These kids can't look back. The only direction available to them is forward." And because a man in a suit jacket had stood in a corridor and read 23 names and understood, finally, what it had cost each of them to keep going in that direction. And because on a Sunday morning in July, 2 years before either of those things happened, a woman in gray scrubs and white sneakers had stopped at a bench in a park and looked at a stranger and said, "You need help." Not as a question, but as a conclusion she had already reached and was now acting on. She had $20. She gave them away. That is the whole of it. A woman stopped. A man sat in an office and read a number he had read before and finally understood what was on the other side of it. 23 families got a phone call that told them the gap was covered. None of them knew each other. All of them needed the same thing. Someone to not look away. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me about a time someone stopped for you or a time you stopped for someone else. I read every one. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it with them. See you in the next one.